Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good, good. So I've seen a couple of your lives, and you do discuss the gun regulations and stuff like that. Um, and I like the discussion you're having about not necessarily regulations, but training, education, what have you. And I think the previous guest, and this is no offense to him or trying to be rude or disrespectful about him, he was kind of stuck on the whole training to be a more proficient shooter, and I think that's a missed point when it comes to what training is. So I'm a former weapons instructor from the United States Navy. I was a
Okay.
instructor for 3.5 years. I was an RSO for 1.5 of those years, which is a range safety officer. And military standard for the education with firearms is safety is the first most profound thing you get trained with. That putting a piece of lead through paper at 50 yards to 500 yards away is the last bit of your training. Um, so as a former instructor and having seen some crazy shit on a firing line, hearing horror stories from buddies of mine that either own or work at gun stores and pawn shops that deal with firearms, just the crazy nonsense they deal with where they nearly have to put somebody down before they get put down just because they're mishandling a firearm. Um, I think that's such a key feature. And I'm a big, huge 2A advocate. I'm not for banning any firearms whatsoever. But that is a big deal to me because I know this. I don't know where the argument came from, like where left leaning people are like, oh, the Constitution was talking about muskets and we don't have muskets now and all this other stuff like that. One thing I will say that the founding fathers didn't anticipate was that we were going to stop educating our children on how important a firearm is because back then a firearm is how you survived.
Right.
You had to use it for hunting. You had to use it for protection because we didn't have the same level of coverage with law and order like we do now. Even though it's jacked up, we still have it. Um, it's like, oh, I have an iPhone 8. Yeah, it's slow and it sucks, but it's still a smartphone. Um, and I think improving the Second Amendment, to encompass that type of education and training, not only gets you more confident, more knowledgeable people with firearms, you will, to a certain degree, you will never, I don't think you'll ever eliminate that type of violence. Even if you were to ban guns in our day and age, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I think it would drastically reduce even accidentals to serious crimes. You have people that will go through concealed courses, and just going through a concealed carry course alone improves safe handling of firearms
Right.
exponentially.
Right.
And I like trying to bring that up whenever I can in these lives because I think people don't take that as seriously. If you don't think that education is key, I want you to go to your local pawn shop that sells and trades in guns and ask them for their worst horror stories. And your jaw won't even hit the floor. It'll be out the front door.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, I'm a military veteran. I have a CCW license, and I thought it was very shocking how easy it is for civilians because I had never handled a firearm until I was in the military.
Thank
So that's how I got introduced to one, and I think that's the best way, honestly, because I mean they teach you everything you really need to know.
you.
Um, and the amount of people I know that have and own firearms as civilians and have never cleaned them, I thought was just astonishing. Um,
My
yeah,
mother-in-law is the same way. She's had this 38 special since the 80s, and she's fired it once, and it still had the same rounds in it that she put in there from the 80s. And then while I was staying with them for about a month before he moved out to Oklahoma from Virginia, she asked me if I'd clean it, and holy hell. And, like, I I guarantee if I was to pull the hammer back and pull the trigger, that pistol would have blown up in my hand. Guaranteed would have blown up.
wow. But see, it's stuff like that should be very basic taught to firearm owners. And we treat, I understand it's a constitutional right, but that right can also be revoked if you are not careful, or you do something wrong. The government can say you no longer have the ability to own one because we don't think that you exercised good enough judgment. And so it's a right, but I also feel like it's a privilege, and people are not treating it like a privilege. They're treating it as, it's my right, I'm going to do whatever I want. And I think if people treated it as a privilege, I think people would be more responsible gun owners, which would, I think, lead to less and less unnecessary deaths from firearms.
What's so sucky about what you just said is that people didn't think of it as a privilege. Treat it as a privilege, not label it as a privilege.
Right.
So they're going to change guns to privilege instead of right.
Right.
And that's the key terminology there. It's like, you were in the military. What does treat, never, keep mean to you?
Treat, keep? I don't know that phrase.
Oh, okay. So treat every weapon like it's loaded. Keep your finger along the receiver. Never aim your weapon at something you don't intend to shoot. Never pull the trigger until you're ready to shoot.
Right.
So that's a little thing that has stuck in my head, and I drill into my students. Treat, never, keep. Just put it in your head. And that's the concept, right? So you treat every firearm that you are handed like it's loaded, ready to fire at all times. I don't care if it's your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your daughter, your son, your father, your mother, the president of the United States. I don't care who hands me that gun. I'm going to treat it like it's loaded, even after I've cleared it, made sure there's no ammo in it for the safety of everyone else and the comfortability of everyone else. I'm going to still treat it like it's a loaded firearm. Right. So if you were to treat guns like they're a privilege, you will respect that firearm to a higher degree.
Exactly.
And I agree with the same concept. And there's also more to make more conservative people happy about that concept. You want to talk about making more jobs, make it more educational, and implement having veterans, combat veterans, firearms instructors that get paid diddly squat at the local gun range to teach federally ran classes. But unfortunately, I'm sure you can agree with this, any great idea that we try and implement to the government, they fuck up every single time. And that's really the big concern with all of this. Like you were mentioning the whole medical background check. If a therapist has said that you're not mentally safe enough to be handling something like a firearm, you're not allowed to get a firearm. Okay, so now if that's implemented by the government, how well do you think that's going to go? How many people that just say the wrong thing are going to be labeled as a danger to society?
But then every time we have a mass shooting, we say, well, it was mental illness. That person's mentally ill. They shouldn't have had a firearm. So then why are we not? We make the military go through screenings. We make law enforcement officers go through psychological screenings. So why would we not implement some sort of basic psychological screenings for civilians?
Yes, and I think those two examples are a good point as to how government fucks that up, because how many soldiers, sailors, Marines, or whoever have you seen that got mentally checked to be good with firearms and they're psychopaths? How many cops have we seen on video with firearms and they were also cleared mentally?
Right.
So it's the problem with you're having the government, you're having lawyers that are now being in charge of our medical, our constitution, which they should be good at, but they suck at, our general health and freedoms. And it's like they don't have anyone in their circle that really knows this stuff and takes it seriously and can't be swayed by financials or what have you. They actually are passionate about their job and doing it right. You're not going to get that in today's politics. Now, with that said, I'm not saying it's not a good idea or it's not something I would push for or want, but really before we even start fixing any of this, universal health care, our own economy, the privilege of privacy when it comes to your own general life and firearms, we have to fix what's at the top of the ladder. Because what's up at the top of the ladder is what's screwing up everything else down at the bottom.
Well, my thing is that I think that one of the biggest causes of not just gun violence, but crime in general, and probably the majority of problems in this country can all be the root cause can all be labeled back to poverty. Because I think we don't have as many people in poverty. We wouldn't have so much crime. We wouldn't have so much domestic violence. We wouldn't have so much child abuse, child neglect, which would also, we wouldn't have as much violence in general, which we wouldn't have as much gun violence. But nobody really wants to get that deep into it. And when we start talking about giving money to uplift people out of poverty, then it's like, oh, well, we're giving everybody a handout.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the solution is.
Well, it's hard because we have to accept the fact that regardless what programs we implement, what things we do to try and help, prevent, whatever, somebody in that tier, whether it's somebody at the very bottom because of poverty and they're doing it to protect their family, to somebody at the very top that's just super hella greedy, somebody's going to take advantage of that program. Being from Jersey in a certain area where it was a weird 50-50 blend of like higher middle class to outrageously poor, I got to see loads of people that legitimately would take advantage of those WIC and food stamp programs just because they would purposely quit their jobs because they were tired of the taxes being taken out, busting their ass and making nothing, make money under the table, claim they don't have an income, and get free food. They get food stamps, but with this under the table job, they're making double what they were making in their day-to-day job. But they're mentally stuck in this whole, like, I can't afford groceries and the government's got to buy groceries for me. Meanwhile, there's somebody else who's literally on that line of like barely making it and technically on paper doing fine, but they need legitimate help that aren't qualifying. And it's just a really terrible spot. So it's a multifaceted correction of trying to chase down ways to block it from being taken advantage of while still making it accessible to it.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to find that line because it's either over restricted to the point where it's not even worth trying, to everyone's going to get it, the money's going to all disappear, and nobody can be using it. Like the PIP loans, like that you were mentioning before, there are loads of small businesses, they would file and apply for a PIP loan during the pandemic, and they got a letter back saying, sorry, we're closed, money's gone.
Right.
What? How? Walmart's got it. Friggin' LG's got it. Friggin' LMSC has it. Like loads of major corporations that have no need for that money have it.
Absolutely.
And it's hard having these discussions because I'm more of a right from center individual that believes in a lot of these left leaning discussions, but I feel like most people, it's a plain black and white. Here's the cause of the problem, eliminate it. Is that really the cause? Like when you go take your car to a mechanic, do they look exactly at what the problem is, or they trace it back to see where it started to try and fix the solution?
Right. And no two situations are going to be identical. Whatever was in the mind of the mass shooter in Colorado is probably not the same reason that the shooter in Uvalde did what he did. You know what I mean? So saying that, oh, we just fix this problem with this solution and that'll stop all. No. I think we have to come at all of these situations with a multifaceted approach. That's why I think, the universal background checks, red flag, like we have to keep going in multi different directions to try to solve this problem.
See, I'm very anti red flag laws because of the cataclysm that comes from that. It's happened. We've seen it. There is evidence. There is proof that this has happened where you piss somebody off and they just say, hey, Joe Blow has a firearm and I think they're very dangerous and needs to be checked up on. And then you get a no-knock warrant at your house, busted in, and you either get taken out by the police or you're charged with a crime, you have your weapons taken away, and you have to go through a process. And take it from me, I've had a weapon stolen out of my vehicle and it was used in a crime. I didn't see that pistol for 3.5 years. and the trial only lasted a year and a half. They took another year and a half to process giving me my pistol back. It's a nightmare when stuff like that. Absolute nightmare. And like, if red flags work the way that it's supposed to, which in today's technology and age, it can't. There's no way to just take somebody's word that somebody's dangerous with a firearm. Absolutely impossible without actually knowing that person wholeheartedly. And who's really going to take the time to sit down and have a discussion with this person and just like double check, have a social worker come with the police, come and sit down with the potential threat and talk to them and figure out, like, okay, this is a BS call. And then what do you do about the BS call? Are you going to go and charge them? More than likely not, because that happens all the time. False calls are made, bad charges are done. You have guys going to jail for statutory rape when it's not true. I've had friends that went to jail for statutory rape and are charged as molesters when that's not what happened. And when it comes true, like, that's not what happened, they get released from jail. The person who made those accusations, nothing happens to them. And that happens with so many different crimes in this country.
Yeah.
So and I know I'm kind of going on a rant, but people want to make it sound like it's so simple, like, oh, just ban AR-15s or just do this or just do that. It's not that simple.
Right.
It's never going to be that simple until we start taking voting local seriously. Stop voting for yourself. Stop voting for your team. Vote for what's best for your community.
Exactly.
Regardless of what colored tie they're wearing that day, or what Twitter says, or what your Democratic or Republican friends tell you to do. I made that mistake in 2016 when I voted for Trump, because I was like, well, I'm more right-leaning and this guy seems better. And I hated Hillary, and just like, coming from a campaign trail side, she basically demonized anyone who was on the fence, potentially thinking about swinging to the left, when she called them all deplorable for being on the fence, for being unsure and thinking maybe third party. And everyone went, okay, fucking bet. You think I'm a deplorable? Red train all day.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've told so many people this, and their number one response is, well, what else are we supposed to do? There are only choices. No, they're fucking not.
No.
Everyone, go look at the statistics, people. Go and see how many times Mickey Mouse is on the ballot and gets a percentile win. Ralph Nader, a dead man, still gets a small percentile of the national votes for president every 4 years. So you can put whoever's name down there you want. You can also help campaign for people for free. You don't need money for campaign. We have social media. It's free. There's an older white gentleman, I forget what state he's in. I think he's running for president, and all he's using is Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, and making his own signs. He's a right-leaning guy, and I applaud him for doing it that way and trying to trick the system, because that's the smart way to do it. You don't need millions of dollars from donors to run a frigging campaign.
I think in the next election, we may probably see the rise of a very strong third party, because I don't know what's going to be left of the Republican Party after 2024, honestly. We'll see what happens within the next year or two, but I think that Donald Trump has totally blown a big hole into the GOP.
Yeah. And I tell people to vote for third party, and they're like, well, they're not going to win. It's like, that's not the point. It's not the point to get them to win. What the point is, you want to get their percentile. I think it's 16 and a half of the overall votes they have to get to qualify to be in the presidential debates. And if you're below that, you don't qualify to be in the presidential debates, which I think is the dumbest freaking rule ever. If you're running for president and you actually have some sort of traction, you should be able to go and debate, regardless of what your average voting percentiles are. But if that can get us to have a national voice for potential third parties to hear other ideas than extreme right or extreme left, why not? Why not go through that tactic?
I agree.
But I want to ask you, is it just a hot button mention to get people in here, or do you honestly believe that AR-15 should be banned? Not trying. I'm not making a jab. And not like a jab. It's not. I want to get your point of view
I
on
don't
that.
I don't want to see any more school shootings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I get that. Coming from a tactical viewpoint of the AR-15 and all those situations, I don't believe, and no one's done a study to prove me right or wrong on this, or others that believe the same thing I do. I don't think that the AR-15 is being specifically selected because it's an appropriate weapon for that action. Because it's not. It's not. A pistol would be the most apt weapon for those procedures. And the reason I say that is because it's easier to conceal, easier to move around, easier to acquire close range targets, stuff like that. The AR-15, a long rifle, especially a full bore 16-inch one, is very difficult at 5 foot, like targets 5 foot away, to keep transitioning and moving. It's a pain. It's not a very tactical weapon for that. So I think the main reason it's selected is because, one, it's extremely popular. Two, it's not under heavy restrictions like many states are when they are with how they are with their pistols. Like I know Virginia, you can only buy. This might have changed recently, and I apologize if I'm wrong. But while I was living in Virginia, you can only buy one pistol a year. Um, and they make those ones very difficult. Getting the AR is super easy. People that have 3D printers or CNC machines have downloaded files on making blank lower receivers, and you can get the upper receiver. You can get literally every part of the AR-15 online without a background check, FFL, or anything like that. The only thing that you need an FFL for and a background check is that lower receiver, the thing that just houses everything. That's
Right.
it. A whole block of aluminum or a block of high tensile plastic. And it's just easier to acquire. So if you want to do damage and you want to do horrible things and you go to the gun store to go buy something, the AR-15 is the easiest one to get,
Right.
hands down. So I don't think banning it is the solution. It's treating it like every other weapon. If you're going to put a restriction on how many of these firearms you can get, you need to do that. Or like you mentioned, which I'm actually for, specific firearms qualifications training like we do in the military. You have to do a pistol qual, you have to do a shotgun qual, you have to do a M16 qual, M14 qual, go and crew serves. Oh my God, crew serve qualifications are a nightmare. And those are the fully automatic belt fed weapons, the friggin' Mark 19, all that stuff. And we do this in the military. So it's I think that's a more apt solution than just outright banning it, because people are going to find loopholes. I have an AR-15. It's my favorite rifle because it's so much fun to shoot. It's fun to build. It's fun to modify. And that's just my personal preference. And I use it for hunting all the time.
And that's probably why other people like to shoot with it.
Yeah. And
Use it for hunting. I heard it's not very good for hunting.
out of the box, no. There's,
Oh,
you need a lot of modifications to make it good for hunting. Like the first thing I did was I upgraded to an adjustable gas block to adjust the variation of how much gas is coming to the bolt carrier group to make it a smooth transition when reloading, as well as upgraded the barrel from a 1.7 twist to a 1.8 twist, which gives it a lot more accuracy and long range. I have a buddy of mine that reloads, and he has made a really phenomenal bow tail projectile on a lathe that is just it's singing on glass for up to 500 yards. Just really good round that he's made. So I use his when I go to the range. You know, really nice scope, stock. Like, you know, if you go to the store and you get just a regular Colt AR-15 or Palmetto AR-15, you put a long range scope on it, and you try and go hunting, you better keep it under 50 yards because you're not going to do well. It's just nice to have a platform that I can easily go hunting with it if I want to go down to Texas, Memorial, North Carolina, and do some close quarters combat training with some friends for fun. I can use the exact same rifle. I just have to change a couple things on it real quick instead of having a whole, $5,000 safe loaded with different firearms. I'm not that guy. I'd rather have like a one-trick pony when it comes to that type of stuff.
right. Okay.
And so the banning of AR-15s for you, it's on the belief that that's the most effective and preferred weapon source for mass shootings. So to just straight up eliminate it.
I mean, I honestly don't see the need for civilians to have it. I just don't.
Well, my
And
argument.
I definitely don't see the need for people to constitutional carry it either.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
Like,
Thank you.
I'm very like I'm very libertarian in that whole aspect of like, if what you're doing doesn't hurt or harm anyone, I don't really give a shit what you do with your life or what. But it's like, for me, I don't believe in open carry. You can do whatever you want. If you feel that it's safer for you to open carry because it visually deters crime, sure, that's a valid argument. The other valid argument is you are now an open target for somebody who is concealing, wanting to do crime because they know you're now a threat and you don't know they have a firearm, and now you're the first one they're going to take out. So I rather be concealed. And people can have those arguments back and forth,
right,
every day about that. Sorry, hotel water. But it I think it's silly because pretty much 99% of the people I've ever seen that open carry or constitutional carry an AR-15 aren't doing it because they feel safer. They're doing it to prove a point and make viral videos where they argue with police on the street.
and that makes no sense to me.
And at the same time, I've seen plenty of videos where you have right-leaning white people do it and they get a talking to. And they get into a little verbal debate with the police, and then it moves on. And then you have black people do the exact same thing who are also right-leaning and pro-Second Amendment, and they end up getting guns drawn, put on the ground, handcuffed, or even shot. Like,
oh, they don't want to hear that. They are not ready for that conversation.
but it's on TikTok. It's on TikTok. You just search it real quick. Go to DuckDuckGo. Go to Google. Go to YouTube. It's there. I'm not doing it. Doesn't make me feel better that this is a truth. I don't like that it's a truth. I don't want it to be a truth, but it is a truth. Same truth. I'm not happy about it per se, but the Constitution can be amended. It has many times. So this whole like, oh, well, they can't take away our gun rights. It's in the Constitution. They can remove that. They can add other amendments to that and change it, whether you like it or not. Now, it's not your job to just argue it can't be removed because that's an invalid argument. It's your job to prove a valid reason why it shouldn't.
Right. And, all it takes is the Supreme Court to interpret case law a certain way, and that be. But everybody's like, no, that's not going to happen.
Roe versus.
Right.
Democrats had 50 years to ratify that law. They never did because they're under the impression of no one's ever going to mess with this, ever.
Well, it's always been like respected that precedent is set, and you're supposed to keep it that way. But clearly that doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. And that's my point. Is like when you think, and I remember when Roe versus Wade happened, and then a lot of issues where women were being like threatened with arrest if they went out of state and had an abortion or a miscarriage and stuff like that. I saw somebody make a tweet or a post that got shared, and they're like, "Is this what the crazy gun nuts have been talking about all these years?" And I'm just like, "Yes, this is exactly what we've been talking about. The moment you think they won't take it away, they do, and it gets crazy. The world gets crazy."
But those same people, when I ask them, how do you feel that women's rights are being stripped away? Then it's not in the Constitution. That's the argument.
And technically they're correct, but at the same time, healthcare is in the Constitution. So it's all on your opinion of whether abortion is considered healthcare or not.
Well, the Roe decision was about a woman's right to privacy, to make that medical decision privately with their doctor. So now we no longer have that right.
Exactly.
Well, and nobody has that right, because what I think a lot of men don't understand is that also applies to them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't know if anyone's noticed the increase of medical insurance spam calls they've been getting over the past couple months, but I get a bunch of them all the time, and it happened right after Wade. So somebody's leaking my medical information to people to be able to contact me, not just on my personal phone, this one, but also my work phone here. I get blown up on a daily basis asking about life insurance for potential male ailments I might have.
Right. And so that's the thing. It's like whether or not you personally agree with abortion, you should agree with a woman having the right to make decisions for her own body and her own health.
Yeah. And I do. I think I like saying
women still die at a substantial rate in this country from childbirth.
Yeah. I like saying that too. Gentlemen, 99% of the people that are for abortion rights don't like abortions and don't want abortions to happen.
Correct.
So it's not just like everyone on the left is going, oh, I want to just kill babies. That's all I want to do. That's my life goal. That's what makes me happy. That's what gets me to go out and get my oat milk latte in the morning, is knowing that's happening. No, that's not what's happening. Nobody likes abortions, right? I didn't like getting a peanut butter shot in the Navy when I was going through my physical days in boot camp, but I had to get it nonetheless, right? I'm all for it for medical reasons. I'm all for like saving the mother. I'm all for like a non-viable fetus being eliminated before it causes health issues to somebody who, if they try and go forth with the pregnancy, could lose the ability to have kids ever again. I'm all for that. I think what most people are really, really concerned about, regardless how often or how unoften it happens, is extreme late-term abortions, just because the mother doesn't want to have the kid anymore.
Can you tell me any time that's ever happened?
For just not wanting to have it, I don't know of any.
It doesn't. That's become a talking point. But there's no such thing as, having an abortion up until the day of giving birth. No, motherfucker, that's called giving birth. Nobody is having an abortion, I think, after 24 weeks because they just decide, you know what? This sounded like a good idea, but just cut this motherfucker out. No, that doesn't happen. It happens because there's something that went wrong with the baby, or something that has put the mother's life in jeopardy.
Yeah, and I hope that's the case. I don't know for sure.
It is. It's 100% is.
I'm not going to deny it or anything like that. I've been having a hard time Googling shit lately for every reason. I keep getting like latest articles, even though I put a timeline search on there and go to different sources. So I.
Ton of medical experts though that are on this app. I don't know if there's any that you follow that you trust. There are several on here that I trust and have talked to and actually met in person. So I can say that I think there's some really good ones here.
I've heard on here and medical podcasts and news articles, I've actually heard, I can't remember specifics. I'm not going to say, or I'm not saying this is a factor. I'm not that person that's like, oh, well, I heard it once, I know it's true. If I heard it once, I barely remember it. It's a possibility and a strong maybe at best. So I've heard.
Like call your local hospital and talk to labor and delivery or any gynecologist office. They'd know the laws and they'd be able to say, no, this is when this happens at X amount of time.
Yeah.
But this whole narrative that women are just out secretly having like massive abortions, or we're using it as a form of birth control, which is really just a way to slut shame women. Well, just close your legs, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Because there's absolutely no, responsibility on anybody else. But the fact of the matter is that's not the case. Abortions are expensive. They're roughly $700 to $1,200. And if it's done before, 9 weeks or whatever, this is something you're going to have to pay out of pocket for. Yeah. Then the process of itself is not a fun procedure. I haven't had one myself, but I took a friend to go get one. And it was traumatizing just for me to take her there, because you go, and of course, all the activists are outside screaming and yelling at you, calling you a whore. That that in of itself is traumatic. But you know, she wasn't happy to do it. It was something that had to be done. And you know, she doesn't regret it. She's gone on to have kids. It just wasn't appropriate time for her, whatever. But that was her choice. That was her decision.
And like coming from a man's perspective, which I think for the longest time up until recently, men have been like forcibly booted out of the discussion, which also it's I think there was a study recently, or at least over the past couple of years, where they proved that censorship causes more disdain and more harm. So when you try and censor a group from a discussion, you now weaponize them to be even more forceful in their beliefs. And I always had a hard time joining the conversation. So I was a very right leaning belief person on pro choice versus pro life. And I was even as ignorant to be one of the types like, well, there's people out there that can't have kids and you're being selfish and not putting that kid in the adoption series. And then I had friends of mine that told me how the adoption system works. I did my own research. I went, holy shit. I've been spewing out nonsense for years. And then then men were starting to be allowed to join the conversation about abortion and being able to actually like not just explain their stories of dealing with abortion with exes and wives or
Yeah.
whoever. Like I have my own stories about that were very traumatic for me, that actually made me very like anti-abortion. And I think now with that, it leads for men to be able to get some form of education, but you also have to have, and I'm not trying to say men are the only ones that are blamed for this, but just men that are open to information, open to anecdotal experiences and statistics and stuff like that to know what's really happening here.
Right.
So I'm still anti-abortion. Like I don't want it to happen, but I also don't want to get in the way of somebody being able to do that procedure. Like I'm engaged and my fiance doesn't want to have kids. I'm indifferent, whatever. Um, and if let's say happenstance we were to get pregnant now and she goes, I really want to have an abortion, I'm going to talk to her and be like, I don't want you to because I would like to have a child with you. But if you come home tomorrow saying that you had an abortion, I'll be upset, but it is what it is. And we're
And
done.
see, I think that those conversations should take place before you actually have sex. There
Yeah.
should be a clear understanding. You know, if the man is very, very adamant one way or another about how it's going to go, he should make that very well known before he engages in sex with the woman.
Yeah.
So no misunderstanding. There's no, well, you know, I'm not having this kid or I am going to have this kid whether you like it or not. There should be that discussion. And I think more often than not, that is not happening.
Yeah. And like I was engaged many years ago. Like this is my abortion story to be as quick with it as possible because I know you have people waiting in the queue. I don't want to take up more time because I think we got most of our points across there. But from my point of view, when I was younger, I was engaged, and the woman I was engaged with said that she was pregnant, and I had just joined the Navy at this time. You know, typical young sailor story. So I was super excited. I was really like jazzed about it. I love this woman, and I was like, I'm going to be able to start a family. I finally have a good, responsible job. This is in the early 2000s when the economy went into the friggin' toilet. So it was like, I was in the best position. But things started seeming like fishy on her end. She started acting weird, and then she started saying that she didn't feel right. Things weren't going well, and she said she went to a couple doctors, and I'm like, why aren't you sending me this medical information? I could put it with TRICARE and start getting you covered. I know you're not my wife yet, but I can still get you covered because I'm claiming this as my child. We can get some sort of coverage for you. And then one day she just calls me and says like, hey, I'm on my way to the abortion clinic. I'm like, wait, what? And I was living in Virginia Beach at the time, and she was still living in New Jersey. We hadn't orchestrated her moving down yet, so I wasn't able to be like physically there to be like, hey, let's talk. She hung up the phone. I have my appointment. Click. And then called a couple hours later saying that, well, it's done. And that was so traumatizing to me. And I'm not the only guy that's happened to. And that's so hurtful to your spirit when you want to be a father. And stuff like that is what leads guys and other people down the road to be very like anti-abortion, because it's not necessarily that they're anti-abortion, they're anti not being able to have some sort of conversation with their significant other about the topic.
Right.
And that a lot of that abortion talk was for years like men don't have a right to the discussion. That was a legitimate talking point. Men don't have a right to that discussion. And it's like, that's not true, I don't believe.
Yeah, I think the men should definitely have a place in discussion if they are going to have any sort of involvement in what happens to that child, for sure. And I don't agree that that situation was right in your case, but you know what I mean. That's why I said people need to really sit down and have those conversations, because if you are not sure what your partner is going to do, then maybe you shouldn't be with that person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We ended up getting a divorce. Well, not divorce. We ended up breaking up because I found out that the reason she got an abortion is because she found a new boo and didn't want to be pregnant with her new boo. So, again, typical sailor story of relationship issues.
Yep.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. I loved the conversation. Thank you for having me on. I'll definitely follow you for future debates and discussions, because I love having them. But I do want to leave at least the crowd with this: vote local. Stop being selfish with your votes. Stop being married to your ideals. Be open to other ideas. I was, and I've become a better human being because of it. And if you are scared of something and don't know about something, go learn. If you're scared about guns, you think they're unsafe, do research of a really good gun range or some people that are really, really knowledgeable about guns, and learn.
Go read a damn book.
Read a damn book. Listen to audiobooks. I listen to lots of audiobooks, and
I love audio.
They're the best, especially when, like me, I do a lot of driving for my work, and that gets the road trip just knocked out with the quickness. Is a nice audiobook or a really good podcast. So, love it.
The podcast that you want to plug?
So I listen to a lot of Two Bears One Cave, just to break monotony, because they're fucking hilarious. That's Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer. They get a lot of people on. I'll listen to a lot of the Joe Rogan Experience when he brings scientists and doctors in, because and also like nutritionists as well, because they bring a lot of cool new science in as well. He had one recently with a regenerative farmer, like an old regenerative farmer from White Oak Pastures. Really, really amazing discussion if that's something that you're into, about regenerative farming and our economy with food. But yeah. I would plug my own, but I haven't uploaded a podcast in probably about a year. I've been really, really terrible. So don't go look at my podcast. They suck.
Yeah, I started one about a month ago. I think I have like 3 episodes on there, and I think I'm just rambling. So I don't know if anybody's even listening.
What do you use?
It's on Spotify right now.
Well, I mean, what software do you use to do your podcast?
Anchor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's what I use. And it sucks that it only gives you an hour, but it's so easy and super helpful. It puts it everywhere. Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, all that stuff. It's great.
Okay. My favorite, I would say, is probably it's either the Muckrake or Muckrakers podcast. It's Jared Yates Sexton. I think he's pretty independent, middle of the road type of person, but really, really knowledgeable about politics.